So good afternoon, sir. I am Stephen Carl Delos Reyes, and I'll be presenting about gender gap and gender inequality. So what is gender gap? Gender gap is the difference between women and men as reflected in social, political, intellectual, cultural, or economic attainments or attitudes. The Global Gender Gap Index aims to measure this gap in four key areas: health, education, economics, and politics. So health looks at the life expectancy, while education encompasses access to basic and higher levels of education, while economics is the difference between men and women when it comes to salaries, the number of leaders, and participation in the workplaces. And lastly, politics examines the difference between how men and women are represented within decision making organizations. So next is the results during the 2017 Global Gender Gap Report. The Philippines was in the top 10, while in the current Global Gender Gap Report, the Philippines moved down to the top 17. So it means that countries around the globe are also doing or aiding their role to reduce gender gap. So gender inequality. So gender inequality is discrimination on the basis of sex or gender causing one sex to be routinely privileged or prioritized over another. So causes of gender inequality. Gender gender inequality, gender prejudice, and resulting gender discrimination begin in childhood. From the moment they're born, girls and boys face unequal gender norms regarding the expectations and access to resources and opportunities with lifelong consequences in their homes, school, and communities. So, what are the effects of gender inequality? Despite the worldwide progress, gender inequality persists. The COVID-19 pandemic has threatened to put years of hard-won progress at risk. Far too many girls, especially those from the poorest families, still face gender discrimination in education, child marriage and pregnancy, sexual violence, and unrecognized domestic work. These are some types of gender inequality. So, examples of gender inequality. Gender inequality in girls' education. Even before the pandemic, girls were more likely than boys to never set foot in a classroom. Conflict, poverty, and other forms of social disadvantage also magnified gender inequality in education. Girls living in countries affected by conflict, for example, are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than boys. Some 9.7 million children were at risk of being forced out of school by the end of 2020, with girls facing an increased risk. So next is child marriage. Child marriage is a form of gender-based violence and the result and driver of gender inequality and gender discrimination. Experts predict that the COVID-19 pandemic is set to reverse 25 years of progress which saw child marriage rates decline. In fact, Save the Children analysis revealed a further 2.5 million girls at risk of marriage by 2025 because of the pandemic, the greatest surge in child marriage rates in nearly 3 decades. So next is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence occurs everywhere around the world across all economics and social groups. While both boys and girls are negatively impacted, girls are particularly at risk. An estimated 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical and or sexual violence in their lifetime, mostly at the hands of their partners. Types of violence may include prenatal sex selection, female infanticide, neglect, female genital mutilation, rape, child marriage, forced prostitution, honor killing, and dowry killing. Many of these gross violations of human rights have been used as weapons of war around the world. Refugee children are particularly vulnerable. Lastly, child labor. Child labor. There are currently 152 million children engaged in child labor around the world. Child labor makes it difficult for children to attend school or limits their attendance, putting them at risk or failing behind their peers. Boys and girls are affected differently by child labor, and parents' decisions are often influenced by wider social norms about different roles that they should play in the home and in society. Girls are much more likely to shoulder the responsibility for household chores, while boys are more likely to engage in harmful work such as